So we are very pleased to have with us Amit Apte, who is an applied mathematician working on data assimilation and dynamical systems in earth sciences. Before joining IISER Pune, he was a faculty member at ICTS TIFR, right here, and a TIFR camp. He obtained his PhD at the University of Texas at Austin and was a postdoc at SAMSI, UNC Chapel Hill, and MSRI. With this, I hand over charge to Amit.
So I guess I've planned this as a sort of say general introduction to data assimilation, as well as a bit of mathematical details, not a whole lot, and some hands-on things that where we actually implement some of the main algorithms that we use for data assimilation. And those are all listed here. I have also listed them there. Starting from something very, 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 very simple. I think that the first one, I think you should know already probably. Gaussian distributions and so on, just to warm up. And the next one is a bit about chaos. I don't know how many of you have studied chaos. Can you raise your hands if you have studied a nonlinear dynamics course or a dynamical systems course? Can you raise your hands a little bit higher? Hope you had good lunch. So, okay, good. About 20, 30% maybe, something, okay. Kalman filter and next is the ensemble Kalman filter will be the other two. These are all Colab notebooks. Actually, yeah, so you can download in your own laptop and then run it. As we go through them, you can do it. If you get bored with what I'm saying, open one of those notebooks and play around with it. Up to you. Okay, so with that out of the way, here is why is this picture here? Wait, things are getting cut. Is it? I think so. Well, okay. As long as it's not something very crucial, I will. What I see and what I see here are different things. Oh yeah, it is cut. That's weird. Let me. Okay, I mean, I think right now what was getting cut was not so crucial, but I don't want to worry about it later. So that's what I had. And that's what, so now, yeah, see that. Anyway, I think it's okay. Close enough approximation. So what's getting cut is my name, I think. That's all. Okay, fine. Okay, so why is this image here? I guess, yes. No, I know it very well, so don't worry. I will not write below it. So, of course, predicting weather, predicting monsoon, for example, well, that's why the picture on the right. For example, when does the monsoon arrive in Kerala? That's where it comes first initially, and then it progresses over Indian subcontinent, for example. These kind of problems. Climate prediction, of course, much longer time scale, but similar system. Essentially, prediction or state estimation problems is what I will be talking about throughout this 2.5 hours. And that one kind of captures the essence of what are the difficulties in solving or trying to address the problem. So I'm standing where roughly the birds are, and I want to predict when the next wave will touch my feet. How would you go about solving that problem? Let's say more than 3 years ago, when you wouldn't necessarily think about AI as the first solution. And what all will you need to actually address that problem? What wave will actually touch your feet? Think about it, it's not that different, apart from time scales and length scales and so on and so forth, as, for example, when does monsoon arrive in Kerala? In a sense, in fact, a lot of the phenomena are very, very similar in nature. Mathematically, in fact, they're very, very similar, almost identical. So what do we need? What do we need to do this? What all do we need to do this? Okay, so I will put that under the bucket of observations. Velocity, everything that you know about the seashore, for example, you would also need to know how if the seashore is very curved versus very what, flat? No, not flat, whatever. Then things would, the waves would be of different type. So observations about the system itself. That's one thing. What else?
Forces.
What kind of forces act and why do you need those? Because then you want to create a model with those forces. So for example, in this case, let's say Navier-Stokes equations, which govern the motion of fluids, and the forces will go into those equations, and those will then help us build a model. So we need data, we need models, and ways to combine it. And essentially, data assimilation is the method or the set of methods of combining the data with the observations, and that's what it's not a bad picture to keep in mind. As we'll see, many of the things like chaos, time scales, length scales, all of these aspects do keep coming back from this example. Yes. Sorry, my mistake. Data with models. Thank you. Combining data with models. Yes, I don't want to distinguish between data and observations. And so the mathematical formulation is what I will start with. And then, so to say, broader motivation from earth science, why the problem is more difficult than it may sound. For example, the problem in the context of, say, engineering systems was essentially kind of solved, at least for low-dimensional systems, between 50 to 20 years ago. 50 years ago was Kalman filter, 20 years ago was particle filter. And between those two things, a lot of engineering aspects of the problem were solved, but not for the Earth system. And that's, so I will motivate why that is a difficult problem. And then the actual algorithms that are used, which are particle and Kalman filters, and maybe summarize. And so hopefully the first two will take the first half, and the last two, actually really one, summary is 1 or 2 slides, so it's not much, but the third one will hopefully take the other half. Okay, so here is a, this is not really a definition. It's a description of what is data assimilation. It's a black art of combining partial and noisy observations. So partial and noisy, both of those should be obvious because essentially redundant. Noisy observations, that's redundancy because there is no observation without noise. And partial, in this case, that's a very, very severe restriction. We'll come to that later. Okay, of a system, and the next part is quite crucial. Over, for example, whatever differential equation, SD, ODE, and so on and so forth, you're thinking about until now, over this last 3-4 days, most of those were very unlikely to be chaotic. I mean, of course, I can't generalize to every OD that you saw in the class over the last 3 days, but most of them are, in fact, well, they're designed to be non-chaotic. The choice is made so that you don't have to deal with chaos. But here, we don't have a choice when dealing with Earth system. So these are chaotic, well, necessarily nonlinear, otherwise they cannot be chaotic. And complex dynamical system, that part will come to when we discuss the Earth system details. So we have these observations of a system whose models are imperfect in multiple senses. One, we don't know enough about all the dynamics that goes on into the system. For example, for Earth system, clouds are a big problem. We cannot really deal with clouds in any reasonably efficient way. Most, for example, weather prediction models will represent clouds in ways that are really not completely physical. Climate models typically don't even deal with clouds, and so on. So the models are imperfect, and the observational models are also imperfect.
Amit, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure, of course, yeah.
So, one hears about this climate being or weather being a chaotic system, and yet people do some kind of ensemble modeling, and that seems to be okay for chaotic systems. So can you tell us what's going on? Why does like having multiple samples somehow give us reasonable predictions?
Okay. So I think about 6 or 8 slides later, I do discuss this point in more detail.
Okay.
Can you wait for the answer until that time?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So so there are 2 things. One, I will talk about it, and I will go through this one of the notebooks where I will discuss this in detail as well. So hopefully, at least some things will become clear. Not everything, but yeah. This distinction between why ensemble, or why can we talk about statistical, basically, why are statistical quantities still meaningful for chaotic systems? I guess that's something that we'll get back to. Is that fine? Yeah. So that's, okay. So the imperfect model, of course, incorporates the characteristics like chaotic and complex and so on and so forth. And we want to combine all of this, data and the model, to get the estimates and, of course, the associated uncertainty for this estimate. Okay, this is something my favorite thing. Estimate the temperature in this room. And if I just say it's 500 Celsius, you cannot say that this is a wrong or right answer. I can always say 500 plus minus 700, and then you will always verify it to be a correct answer. So without uncertainty, anything works. But when you have to deal with estimates with uncertainty, that's when we have to deal with what is a good or bad estimate. Okay, so there are many applications outside weather and climate. The terminology data assimilation arose in weather and climate. The terminology that I will introduce later, which is nonlinear filtering, arose in more industrial or engineering applications. Now there are more and more applications in biology. What was missing in biology until now essentially were the models, mathematical models, but anyway. Okay, and the challenges I've kind of listed here, not really that crucial right now. So, what's the mathematical framework? The mathematical framework is here. We start with a dynamical model, which is either something like a ordinary differential equation, which now we have studied, if you had not studied it before, or a stochastic, either differential equation or just in general stochastic model. For example, the most common model is Markov process. Markov process in the sense that it does not depend on the past given the present. And that's why I've written it as xt as a function of xt minus 1, where now you can, if you want to think of it as a stochastic or Markov process, then think of M as some kind of appropriate stochastic map rather than a deterministic function. So in terms of notation, it's just very general. Okay. One of the things that happens with the current AI models that are being used, things like ForecastNet, GraphNet, I think, GraphCast, something like that. There's a whole bunch of models coming out of China. Sorry, I forgot the names of those. Most of those, in fact, are not Markovian. That's a severe problem for dealing with these methods. So incorporating the AI models that are last 2-3 years are quite fashionable and common, and combining the mathematical methods I will talk about today is there is a big mismatch. Of course, you can all question.
When you say they are not Markovian, then what does that mean? Like,
okay. So so here essentially I'm thinking of, let's say, think of T as every 6 hours. So I want a prediction from now until 6 hours from now, from then 6 hours from then, and so on and so forth. These models to get XT will use something like past 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days worth of data, and not just last 6 hours. So they will predict now with last 6 days, predict 6 hours from now, again using past 6 days plus now, and so on and so forth. So it's basically the lag. This is lag 1 Markov model. They are Markov but then multiple lags. There is always the usual trick of converting multi-lag to 1 lag, but then the state space becomes so huge that practically it's very difficult to deal with it. Yeah. So yeah, you can. I guess they are Markovian with multi-lag. Yeah. Lag n Markov models. Yes. Okay, this is I'm going to only talk about the lag 1 Markov. Yeah.
You could also predict something, see that they were wrong or something like that. Align them.
I'm not sure I understand what do you mean by so your first part and the second part I didn't manage. So what do you mean by autoregressive? Explicitly.
6 hours, and you feed it data that is correct for this hour. Do they correct for how much? Like, are they trying to auto adapt?
That will be the next 2.5 hours. Yes, that's precisely what we want to do, is we predict something, we get the data, now we want to make changes so that you make improvements in the next prediction and so on and so forth. Yeah, that the method will be exactly recursive in that sense. So, yeah. Okay, so we have observations. For the observations, the condition is that they are only dependent on the present time. This is usually not a severe restriction. Sometimes it can be. For example, when satellites observe something, there is a small lag between but the amount of time for the light to go from surface of the Earth to satellite is not so high. Okay. That's a trivial delay. There are more difficult delays to deal with, but I will not talk about it. But for now, the observations at time t depend on the state at time t. And I will only talk about additive noise, so plus eta t. And so eta will be some appropriate noise distribution. We will only talk about Gaussian noise distributions for now. This is not necessarily always the case. The mathematical machinery just goes through smoothly, but at least Kalman filter and ensemble Kalman filter that I will talk about will not be useful when there are non-Gaussian noises. So, okay. The h is the function that takes the state of the system to the observations, and for example, when I said partial observation, this could be simply a projection operator. So it projects onto the coordinates that we observe and something, but it could be something much more complicated, like, for example, rainfall. Rainfall is a much more complex function of things like temperature, humidity, winds, and so on and so forth. There is no simple functional form that you can write down. Most of these are essentially codes that you have to run to get the function h. So function h may not be available as an analytical functional form. Okay, and observational uncertainty. This needs to represent instrumental uncertainty, and what is called representativeness error. A mouthful of a word, but the main difference, in some sense, I don't know if you have discussed uncertainty in any great detail in any of your courses. There are two distinct types of uncertainties. One is aleatoric uncertainty, and the other is epistemic. And those two are two different types of uncertainties. But I'm not going to discuss too much in detail here. Extremely important distinction, most of the time completely neglected and not even discussed. But okay, so that's why I thought I'll just at least put it up there. And these differences are something that that actually does affect the output. Okay, so this is what we have: a model which will be a Markov model, observations with additive noise. And what do we want to predict? What do we want to get? We want to basically get the state of the system. Essentially, there are three types of problems. If you have observations going from time 0 to time t, or what did I call it, tn or n, observations going from time 0 to n, if you want to want a prediction of the state or estimate of the state between 0 to n, it's called smoothing. In some sense, it's thought of as something you go forward, and then as you go backwards, you would smooth out the estimates. Very vague kind of explanation, but anyway. Estimating the state at time n is called filtering problem. And of course, estimating anything after time n is the prediction. So think of n as the present, beyond n is prediction, at current time is filtering, and anything in the past is smoothing. Okay, what do we want in the probabilistic formulation of the data assimilation problem? Given the observations, and the model is assumed to be given, so the PM doesn't make explicit appearance there. Given the observations, we want to know what the state is. And in this case, effectively, what is the probability distribution of the state conditioned on the observations, which is a conditional distribution, also called a posterior, using in the context of Bayes theorem or Bayesian analysis. So the object of interest is the distribution of xt, the state, conditioned on the observations y1 through t. Right? And that's what we will look at. There are these things about prediction and smoothing and so on, but I will be basically talking about filtering theory throughout and not talk about smoothing, which is significantly, well, okay, it just gets more tedious. I'm not going to talk about it. Prediction is straightforward because once you have the current state, you just use the Markov model to make the prediction.
Amit, a quick question for you.
Yes.
Can you also at some point just give us a map of, who are the big agencies worldwide who are doing this data assimilation? And are they all using similar techniques or do they use different techniques?
I don't have those names on the slides anywhere. So let me just mention it right now. ECMWF in Europe, that's one big one. In the US, I forgot whether it is NOAA, National NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency. I forgot what NOAA stands for. So NOAA in NOAA in US, ECMWF in Europe, ECMWF, and the Indian counterpart of that is NCMRWF. This is European Center for something, medium range weather forecast. Yeah. And then there is a National Center for Medium Range, NCMRWF. This is Indian agency, National Center for Medium Range Weather Forecast. Of course, IMD essentially through IITM, Pune, Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, Pune. This is not the IITM that probably is most familiar to this set of people. This is IITM Pune. And Japan, I don't know what agency it is. They have their own weather data assimilation systems and weather forecasting systems. And other countries probably do this on varying degree, completely independently. Many of them would be using either European or US outputs and then doing some post-processing and so on and so forth, because the amount of investment needed for doing this is significantly high. And yeah, so but these 3-4 will definitely are definitely fairly.
And the techniques used are similar.
So techniques used are the ensemble Kalman filter is one of the most commonly used ones, which I will talk about in detail in the second half. What I will not talk about is what are called variational methods. So I'll just write the name here, and the most commonly used one is what is called 4D VAR. 4-dimensional variational data assimilation. 4D has a very weird origin. They used to do basically without taking into account the time, the temporal evolution of uncertainties was not accounted for, and that used to be called 3D VAR. Only the spatial dependence of the uncertainties was included, so that's why 3D, spatial, 3 space dimensions. So 3D VAR was where covariances for the spatial dependence of covariances was accounted for. When they started taking into account the temporal dependence of covariances, then they added the 4th dimension, so that's why it's called 4D VAR. But variational methods is something I will not talk about. 4D VAR is largely associated to the European centers. They spent a lot of time and energy and money and people to develop these methods, variational methods. Very, very popular in mathematically challenging. The French can do it. The US have less expertise in that, but sorry, very generic statement, not very useful. And then there is the ensemble Kalman filter, which is what I will talk about later and which is largely associated to developments in the US, but that I will come to.
Yeah, you can, maybe later, but you can also give us a scale of computation involved. Does it take days and months?
Okay,
yeah.
So maybe I'll come to that somewhere halfway down the line. And right now there are no numbers in the sense, there is no scale here at least, right? So just a picture, I'll skip this, I'll come back to this picture later. What is supposed to be shown is that there is some true system that we want to observe. What we actually have are just the observations and a model for how to update or how to go forward in time, and we want to combine the two things and so on. So this recursive method I will come back to later. A more commonly used picture is this. Essentially the machinery of what are called hidden Markov models. The hidden Markov models work like this. The X process, which is the state of the system, the model for the state of the system, the X random variables are what we want to estimate, which is what we don't know. What we observe are the Y, the observation random variables, and we want to get information about the X from the Y as a conditional distribution of X given Y. So that's a mathematical formulation that we will be working with. Okay, just at least at some scale here, the question that Sandeep asked. So the dynamical model in this case, for example, simple problems like Lorentz 93, Lorentz 96, these toy systems on which people work, try out the algorithms are low dimensional. It could be D equal to 3, D equal to 40 or something. The ocean atmospheric models these days that are used are of the order of about 10 million, actually now we have probably 100 million dimensions. So that's the D 10 to 7 or even, if it's small model, then something like 10,000 or 100,000 and so on. So 10 to 4 to 10 to 7 is the range of number of variables that we want to try to estimate. The observations, I didn't mention the size of the observation. The observations are significantly less. Typically, the number of observations available at a time every 6 hours, roughly, is of the order of between 10,000 to a lakh or and so on. So at least 1 or 2 or 3 orders of magnitude less than the size of the system that we deal with, or size of the model that we deal with. I should make a distinction between the system and the model. Those are the kind of the sizes that we have to deal with. As I said, I've been saying observations are partial and noisy. Partial is every 6 hours in time, and of course very sparse compared to the size of the system. Okay, so just very quickly, I guess maybe you can sleep after this if you want, if you're not already. Here is one line description of how this works in some sense. How does a conditional distribution give us more information? So here is a Gaussian, picture of a Gaussian, taken from Wikipedia, I think, or something. This is a picture of a Gaussian in the sense that what is shown are a bunch of sample points from the Gaussian. These are those dots. And it's a Gaussian in 2D, X and Y variables. There is a correlation. That's why the ellipse is not parallel to either X or the Y axis. There is some tilt to the angles. What are those called? The semi-major and semi-minor axis of the ellipse are tilted with respect to the X and Y axis. So that's the indication of a correlation. And what are shown are the marginals. So now if you observe, let's say Y equal to 3, for example, what happens to our estimate of the X? Without knowing anything about Y, the distribution of X is what is shown on one of those axes. So here, let me stand here. So the unconditional marginal of X, just the marginal of X is here in blue. And the mean is somewhere, I think it's 0 in this case, the mean is 0. What happens if I observe X to be, sorry, Y equal to 3, then essentially we know that we are on this line. Technically, we should really be in a band around that, but okay, I'll not. And now if we basically take the marginal along this line, then the mean is going to be shifted and not equal to 0. It's roughly comes out to be something like close to 1. So the unconditional distribution of X, marginal distribution of X, has a mean of 0. With the observation Y equal to 3, you basically get a mean of P of X given Y to be 1. So you get additional information because of the observation Y, and this is in a nutshell what data assimilation does. Every time you have observation, you get a conditional distribution. What I have not shown, which is in the notebook over here, is what happens to the variance. The variance also actually decreases. So you not only get more information, but also more information in the sense of a reduction in uncertainty. Okay, so shall we try that? Let's Where is it? Yeah. Nope. Sorry. Wrong notebook. This one. Okay. A very, very large part of this code is from not me, from Gemini. I hope it's correct. I think it is correct. No, I checked it. It is correct. So what I'm going to, I'll just go to the picture that comes out of the code. And this is not about how to get this. The notebook I've shared already here, and you should have access to that already. Okay. So what it's shown is this. Two dimensions, x1, x2, some Gaussian distribution that I chose by specifying the mean and the covariance of the Gaussian. What are shown here are the contour plots of a constant density surfaces. Sorry, constant density contours are shown here. And as I said, the indication that there is a correlation is essentially you see the semi-major axis to be not aligned with either the x or the y axis. And so there is a correlation between x and y. The code explicitly show, this was plotted by choosing a covariance matrix from which you can compute the correlation, 1 over square root of 2 or something. And what are plotted are the marginals. The marginal of x, the marginal of y in solid lines. And dotted line is the distribution of x1 given x2. So what will happen if I change, and in this case, the value of x2 is whatever the mean happens to be. The mean was 3.3. So in this case, the mean is 3. So if I shift the observation, and this slider is for observation. So if I shift the observation to the right, that is increase the value of x2 that is being observed. So suppose the observation happens to be, say, 4 or something. What will happen to that picture? So there are a couple of things here. One, that you can explicitly see that the variance goes down. So the variance of the distribution of x1 given x2 is less than the unconditional distribution P of x1. This is one indication of that we are getting some information out of the observations in some sense. And the mean shifts. That's another thing. The other thing that I thought, one way to think about this, I guess you must have heard this concept that the expected value of x2 given x1 is a random variable. How is this a random? Was there a question? How is this a random variable? Why is this a random variable? Okay, I'm not going to describe the mathematics behind why this is a random variable, but here is a picture. As I change x2, which is the slider over here, the mean, which is the center of the dotted distribution, will keep shifting. So essentially this expected value, sorry, I'm doing it the way I have plotted, I'm observing x2 and I'm looking at the distribution of x1 given x2. So as I change x2, the mean of x1 keeps shifting. x2 itself is a random variable, has a distribution, and hence the mean of x1 given x2 will have a distribution, and hence it's a random variable. Okay. Not a mathematical explanation, but more like a visual explanation of how to think about conditional expectations as random variables. Okay, so, and then you can play around, right? So if you increase the value of x2, what should happen? It will go up. If this ellipse were tilted the other way, instead of having a slope right now of a semi-major axis to be positive, if the semi-major axis had a slope which was negative, what would happen when you change the variable x2? Think about it. It should go the other way around. Negative correlations and so on and so forth. Okay, I'm not going to write down the formulae for the conditional expectation. Actually, pretty straightforward to write down. A glorious formula for this will come later. A much simpler formula in the case of x1, x2 is easy to make understand this. And if you know the formula, good. If you don't know the formula, it's actually up there somewhere in the code, essentially. Because the code basically computes the mean and covariance analytically, and then using the analytical formula, it computes the mean and covariance, and then plots. So the plots are all out of the analytical calculations, which are somewhere over here. Anyway, so I will leave you to play around with this notebook later, just for fun. And those cases are down there: zero correlation, negative correlation, and so on and so forth. Okay. Just for fun, try to change this so that, let's say, one of the marginals, say the marginal of x2 or the marginal of x1, is a bimodal distribution. So right now both are, so this is a joint Gaussian distribution. Suppose you make it into a mixture Gaussian model. So something like where you have two Gaussian distributions as a mixture Gaussian. So now none of the two marginals are going to be Gaussians anymore. What will happen in this case? Interesting problem to think about. Will not be too difficult to code. Well, you have Gemini as well. Try to code it up. The only problem is no analytical solution will be available in this case. Okay, so then you have to work harder to get the mean and the covariance. But yeah. Okay. Anyway, so just for trying it out. I will now go to the slides. Any questions about that? I hope you have studied all of this before, but this is just to brush up your memory and catch up. Okay, so that's it. That's data assimilation. So what's missing? What's missing is the time dependence. We should really be doing this in time, and that's a sequence. That's an iterative or recursive movie that we'll watch, or we'll have to create mathematically, and this is what will be the next half an hour or so. Yeah. There are much more general mathematical descriptions of the same processes, either using general transition kernels so that you do not have to deal with densities, or approaches that are helpful for dealing with Monte Carlo approximations of these problems based on either Feynman-Katz's formula or Makin approaches and so on. I will not talk about those here at all, but just as a pointer to what else can be done with this. Any questions up to this point? So, I said this before, it's a complex that part of the reason why I kept saying models are incomplete, insufficient, and so on and so forth, is because every one of the things that is in this picture affects the weather and the climate on various different time scales. And we simply cannot model all of this for sure. Certainly not the goat there, usually not the humans which are not visible, but somebody is inside the car, and so on and so forth. So it's a system that consists of so many different parts that everything simply cannot be modeled at all. We cannot incorporate all of this into the model. We can't even do snow and ice and cloud properly. Forget human activities and vegetation and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's an extremely high-dimensional system. There is one problem. Yeah. What is what? Sorry. Oh, yeah. Okay. I guess since the M came in, the terminology goes as follows. Short range usually is, I think, up to 3 days. Don't take my word for it. If this were an exam, I would have looked it up much more carefully. But okay, I think it's up to 3 days, something like medium short range, or maybe now it is 5 days. See, it depends on how well can you predict in future. But right now it is 3 to 5 days is short range. Beyond that is medium range. And beyond, I think 1 or 2 months or 6 months, I don't now remember, this is a very large uncertainty, is the long range weather forecast or long range forecast. That's not even weather forecast anymore. After 6 months, it's not really weather forecast. But yeah. Monsoon, one of the difficulties why monsoon is such a complicated and difficult problem is because we want monsoon forecast at least 15 days, if not a month or 2 months in advance. And that fits in exactly in this weird time scale where it's not really short range, definitely not short range. It's not very long range either, but somewhere in between. And the medium range is actually one of the big problems. I don't have enough time to discuss why medium range is more difficult than long or short range. Part of the answer will come in when I will talk about statistics. And yeah, the other problem is we have just one Earth. I don't know. If think about why this is a problem. Most of the, so just a two-line answer to this in some sense is that most of the techniques you have been talking about throughout this week effectively, and throughout almost all probabilistic literature when you want to apply to real systems, is that you would try to do repeated things. Many times repeated measurements even of the same system. That is simply not possible. 5th of August is gone, is never coming back. Okay, so we can't measure it again. So a few random questions just to put this in slightly broader context. As I said, this is a context statement. The first two questions here are essentially deterministic answers. We almost never use, for example, stochastic versions of Newton's laws to think about ellipses, eclipses, not ellipses, and the solar system and so on and so forth. I will contradict myself in just about 2 more slides, so wait for it. But anyway, for eclipses and so on and so forth, Halley's comet, these are all deterministic models, Newton's laws, you know the masses, this and that and so on, does perfectly well. Double pendulum, a single pendulum, just a pendulum clock, Newton's laws work perfectly well. Deterministic Newton's laws work well. Double pendulum is a problem. So here is a double pendulum. Where is it? There. So it begins with a single pendulum. Very simple system, of course. And now double pendulum is 2 rods attached to each other. So essentially think of 2 pendula, one attached to the other one. And the property of this system, as you might notice even within this 20-second video, is that it's quite irregular. The mathematical definition of irregularity will be chaos. And you can see that it's already not doing anything like just a single pendulum. The top, if you just watch, say, the top rod, sometimes it's slow, it goes on for slow, sometimes then it speeds up, and so on and so forth. There is non-trivial, essentially in this case, energy transfer from one to the other, and that's part of the chaotic motion. Yeah. Okay. Fascinating videos. Yeah, there are multiple other videos online.
Hello.
Yes.
So yeah, I have also seen this video in other contexts, but this video, this representation of double pendulum, I mean, this phenomena, this is not good enough evidence that this is a chaotic system, right? You should.
This video is not absolutely not a evidence of chaotic system.
But
it's an illustration of what chaotic system kind of generally do.
Yeah. But I mean, if you started from a little off and then they're far away, that shows that it's chaotic. But just because it's jumping on and off everywhere, that does not mean it's chaotic.
No. That absolutely, that's perfectly right. That just having irregularity does not necessarily mean chaos.
Yes.
The other way around is actually true. But yeah, so I completely agree with you. Yeah. There are other videos on YouTube also where people take 2 different pendula and then you release it. So the only uncertainty is the slight difference between how you release. And then you will see that one goes this way, the other goes the other way, and so on and so forth. And the such videos also exist. Sorry, this was part of lack of time. If I had searched enough, I would have found some videos which show that, which I didn't spend enough time. So instead of that, I have numerical illustrations to do this with simulation instead of videos. Okay. Wait, I don't want to play nothing anymore. What? Cancel. Okay, so predicting double pendulum is itself a fairly non-trivial problem. If I just give you the video, for example, what is missing? Double pendulum will be described by position and the momenta of those 2 things. What you will get from the video will be positions, and then it's a partial observation, and it will reach the same essentially conceptual issue that appears for weather prediction problems. It's exactly identical conceptual issue. Okay, I talked about breaking waves, which wave will reach you, weather prediction, maximum, minimum temperatures, rainfall, all of these things. The two main things about these is that deterministic models. So as I said, for weather prediction also we use Navier-Stokes. So those are deterministic equations. All of this up to here is deterministic equations. That is, they will be either differential, partial, or ordinary differential equations. The next two, stock exchange, number of cars, traffic modeling, and so on and so forth, and a whole variety of other problems in engineering. Many of them are modeled by stochastic models, so that's why Markov methods are so well developed for these type of models. The gray question, I don't know, it's very gray. I don't want to talk about it. And the last one is a inherently stochastic or inherently probabilistic description is what we think about it. But again, I'm not going to talk about quantum mechanics. Okay. So where data assimilation fits in are essentially the three questions in the middle here. Chaotic, complex, deterministic dynamical systems with partial observations. And all of these have that same. Okay, so let me skip this. I'm kind of running out of time for where I want to go. So let me skip this. At some point, if you want, you can discuss later. We have good theories, but the models are not good enough. Why? Okay, and what is missing clearly is the initial conditions for these systems and associated uncertainty estimates for these. And this is where the observational data come into picture. How many observations you need, what kind of observation data you need, and so on. So data assimilation fits in this space of interactions between models, data, and theories. And the distinction between models and theories is a big topic that I will. Yeah, so I guess something that would have been good to see. So let me try to see. I did not go to presentation mode here at all. It's a very nice article about what happened over the last 50 years in the weather prediction case. This only talks about weather prediction. This article does not, the last article here, does not talk about climate prediction problems, completely different methodologies in some sense. But one of the key issues there, so there are three things that happened. One, the models kept getting better. Two, the data kept increasing, and the methods for combining those two kept getting better at an incremental rate. There was essentially no breakthrough, a big aha moment where somebody said, oh yeah, great, now we can do extremely better. Like, for example, what happened between, say, ChatGPT, 3 and 4, 2 and 3, something like that. There was no big breakthrough that happened in any of those time period of last 50 to 70 years. Every one of those incremental improvements has led to a change in the accuracy of weather prediction from what could be achieved within one day. The kind of accuracy that we could do for one day about 50 years ago can now be achieved for 7 days. And a large part of it is data assimilation improvements. But, yeah. Okay. So not all science happens with big aha moments and so on. Okay, so chaos. So coming to some of the questions that have been asked before, statistics versus deterministic, and this, what happens if you change slightly the initial condition. So here are the standard pictures. You must have seen this multiple times by now, right? Two initial conditions of differential equations that are written on the top, the Lorentz ODE. This is what is solved in 1963 and made chaos a popular name afterwards. And almost every trajectory of this system looks identical. That's what is seen on the left side. So the two initial conditions that started slightly differently, this was like 10 to minus 6 or 10 to minus 8, I don't remember, some very, very, very tiny difference in solving those differential equations at time t equal to 0 leads to two trajectories that are seen on the right. One is red, the other is blue. And after some time, something like time 20 or so, there is a visual difference between the two trajectories. Before that, there is not that much difference that you can see, but you can, after that, you can see the visual difference. So You start very, very nearby. For some time, things will be close. Eventually, they will become completely different. And that's on the right-hand side. Okay, that happens. So that's just the X component, for example. X, Y, Z, 3 components. Each component will show that kind of behavior. But when I plot just a picture of all 3 components, so the 3-dimensional plot, say, the distinction between red and the blue essentially disappears. If I were to do this for much, much longer, the red and the blue will essentially be identical, in fact, at the scale of the picture that you see here. So the trajectory looks identical. What does that mean? That basically the statistical averages over either of the 2 trajectories are going to be the same. And this is the phenomena of ergodicity. This is part of the answer to Sandeep's question about how can we deal, I mean, even if the systems are chaotic, the statistics that you get out of those still do make sense. Question?
Whether, how is it enough to get statistics? Because I want to know the, whether it rent one or not. So,
yeah, whether the statistics that you get are sufficient or not is a extremely difficult question for whether. So we need to know something about the time scales over which the averages are sufficiently close to statistically, so to say, converged averages. And there really aren't really good estimates for weather for these problems, unfortunately. So having said that statistics can make sense, actually for weather prediction problems, they are insufficient because we do not know these timescales very well. They are definitely much longer than what data that we have. So we have data, let's say, for actual observational data are available for something like 30, 40, 50 years, maybe 100 years if you go back for some variables like temperature, maybe rainfall, and so on. But other variables for the last maybe 20, 30 years after satellites. And 20, 30 years is certainly not enough to get good statistical averages. So in principle, statistics can be obtained, but in practice, that's a very difficult question to answer. Yeah.
So Amit, just so that just to understand
yes.
better,
Yeah.
what you're saying is you take any initial point, perturb it slightly, you'll get a very different path, but the overall statistics will be similar. And that's true for pretty much any perturbation around. I mean, I'm asking because what people seem to do. No,
for generic, I mean, this is essentially the almost sure phenomena. So for almost every perturbation, this will be true. There will be very, very special measure zero perturbations for which this will not be true.
I see. So this justifies what people do in practice. They simply perturb the system a little bit, maybe 100 times, and then they assume that they have 100 IID samples. And it doesn't quite matter how you perturb.
So unfortunately, IID assumption is pretty much always false. But yeah, okay. So apart from the IID part of it, I agree with the rest of the statement.
No, I mean, I guess the point in some sense is that people don't need to be careful in how they perturb. So
not true either. So not true because of the first part of the answer that I gave, which is that we do not have enough time period to have statistically converged averages. And so these perturbations actually do matter in practice.
So how should one perturb?
So that's part of, I will, so this is where, that's part of the art, the black art that I mentioned, can I talk about this after I've introduced at least a few more concepts? In particular, the covariances and what is the role of covariances in, for example, Kalman filter. Actually, understanding the role of covariance in Kalman filter is sufficient to answer the question that you just asked. In what way should you perturb? The one-line answer without the details is that the perturbation should be in directions of largest uncertainties, largest instabilities. But I haven't talked about instabilities, so that's why I can't answer the question fully.
Thanks.
For something like 40 or 50, you will definitely not get a statistically converged. So the statistics of red and blue trajectory from 0 to 50 will be distinct. You go for say 5,000. Actually, in this case, you don't need 5,000, but large. yeah, so that's basically what I yeah. And this is the situation actually we are in. We only have 50. We don't have 5,000, and that's a okay. So that's one thing. And then, sorry, I guess I should have uncovered both of these at the same time, but I said this already, that trajectories diverge away and the divergence is exponential. That's part of the definition of chaos in some sense. And this is what is called the phenomenon of positive Lyapunov exponents. I'm not going to talk about or define Lyapunov exponents. So for now, it's just take it as a term. And actually, the notebook should have some indications of what this means. Okay, so these two may sound slightly contradictory, but hopefully not. The divergence of trajectories and convergence of statistics are two completely distinct concepts. And both of those are needed for definition of chaos. In fact, a proper mathematical definition of chaos requires both of these as part of the system. Okay, so deterministic predictions are impossible. If you just make a single prediction, by deterministic I mean you make a single prediction, that's basically impossible because of this phenomena. And hence we basically want probabilistic predictions, but not just that. We also then need frequent observations. If you observe only once and want to make even a probabilistic prediction, the uncertainty will just keep growing and eventually the predictions are going to be useless. So to keep the predictions within a limit, this is, okay, so just to illustrate a bit more about this phenomena of chaos, here is another notebook. Okay. Oh, just 1 second. Huh? Yeah, okay, fine. No, yeah, correct notebook. I thought for a second, I thought I got the wrong one. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the details of the code. It's basically the first half, the first 2-3 cells defines how do you solve differential equations. And I'm not going to talk about how to solve differential equations using Python. That's the first part of this code. Set up how you solve a differential equation. In this case, the differential equation was the Lorentz model, which I wrote down in the slide. It's the references, Wikipedia has a good description of what the model actually is, what the differential equations are. And just some illustrations, which were also on the previous slide, so I'll just run through it quickly. You take initial conditions, solve the differential equation, you get a whole bunch of points, don't really mean anything, so I'll join them by lines, linear interpolation simply, and this looks very weird. If you observe it more frequently, then you get something that looked like what it was earlier. So this was the picture that we saw earlier. There are actually in this case, there are two initial conditions which are very far from each other. The x, the crosses here, and then their trajectories, which are the solutions, and the final conditions are the two dots over there somewhere. So this is just an illustration of how this looks like. So what is this phenomena of you take two initial conditions and they diverge from each other? That is somewhere down the line. So let me go to that part of the notebook where some other pictures of how the trajectories look like if you plot them and so on and so forth. So let me skip that. And here is the solution to, so here is the crux of divergence. So in this part, what is being done is you have two initial conditions. One, which is the first two lines here, the x traj 1, and then an initial condition, which is simply some small perturbation, a random small perturbation of the order of 10 to minus 8. And then solve the differential equation again, store the two, and find the norm of the differences between the 2 points. That's it. So find the distance between the 2 points as they evolve in time. And then I'll just plot this difference as a function of time. So firstly, if you plot both the trajectories, so the initial conditions are here, the cross over there, and the cross and plus, they essentially look identical. The difference is 10 to minus 8. And the final at time t equal to whatever, 1000, I forget how much it was, they land up somewhere very far from each other and so on and so forth. Yeah? So that's one. And if I plot, this is the plot I had put in into the slides, which you already saw. And this is the difference, the distance between the two trajectories, x and x prime, as a function of time, plotted on a semi-log scale. So this is a logarithmic scale. This one is x-axis is linear, y-axis is log. And the distance increases on an average exponentially, but not actually exponentially monotonically. So it's not a monotonic increase in distance. In fact, the distance sometimes comes down. It goes up. So the points can go far. Maybe they come near. They go far and they come near and so on and so forth. They do all sorts of stuff. On an average, the distance grows exponentially. So basically, this exponential growth, yeah. Right. So why is that happening? Yeah, maybe let me ask the question. Sorry, no, you please don't answer. Somebody else. You don't answer. You don't have, I don't give you the opportunity to answer. Somebody else. Why is there a flat part? Why doesn't the distance keep growing exponentially? So the system is bounded. All the trajectories, we saw the solutions, what they look like. The solutions simply are going around and round and round in this, what is called a butterfly shape. So this is called a Lorentz butterfly attractor. And they remain within that bounded region of that butterfly attractor. So essentially, this is kind of roughly the length of the attractor. The distance cannot go beyond that. Yeah, that's what's happening. It is going up and down. Oh, even more. So the points, okay, once they have diverged to the point of something like order 1, right? This is 10 to 1 on the log scale. So once they have gone to a distance which is order 1, they never come back to even smaller distances. This is part of, actually, okay, so now I have to think harder. There probably are other chaotic systems for which that may happen. That is, even after they have gone far apart, they may come close and eventually then diverge again. I think such systems exist. But there is no mathematical proof that says that they will not ever come back. That's definitely does not exist. So examples, I don't remember right now. But for this system, that does not happen. For many generic systems, that does not happen either. Generically, once the distance has grown to the size of the attractor, the length of this whole butterfly shape, it will never come back to much smaller distances. And that's a generic feature of most chaotic systems. Specially designed chaotic systems may have this feature of, yeah. So the slope of this line, so I mean, what is this function? If I were to fit a straight line to this, what will be the equation of such a straight line? So let me call that distance, the distance between xt and x prime t, as d of t. So I'm basically plotting d of t in a semi-log plot as a function of time. So if I were to write this as the equation, what will that be? Okay, so mt plus c is equal to log of dt. And so this will be exponential, right? So some k times e to the power. And now I'm going to change the symbol m to lambda. And this will be lambda t. So the first part of the plot will be of this form. If t were in seconds, what are the units for lambda? Those are 1/2 second. Or lambda basically gives us a time scale. or sorry, 1 over lambda gives a time scale. So 1 over lambda is what is called the Lyapunov time scale of the system. This is the time scale over which, or basically if you take something like 3 or 4 e-folding times as a time scale, then 1 over lambda times 3 would be the 3 e-fold time scale. And so that gives a time scale for the system. And the Lyapunov time scale for weather is of the order of about 5 days or so, a few days, 3 to 5 days approximately. And so this whole thing, if we had a good estimate of the weather at some time, within about 3 to 5 days, we will increase the errors by a factor of E, roughly 2, and so on and so forth. That's so that gives you some sense of the time scale in the weather prediction problem. And these are for this time here is dimensionless. These are just dynamical systems which do not have any physical units associated to them. Okay, so that was this was the illustration. What happened? But the time scales over which, so there is a difference between, since we talked about statistical averages, this is a time scale it takes to diverge, let's say, with the errors to increase by twice or 4 times or 8 times or something like that. The time scale it takes to cover the attractor, that is to have sufficiently good statistical averages, is a completely different time scale, because that's not associated to this at all. That has to do with, in fact, the smallest of the Lyapunov exponents. So we can't get anything out of this about how long it will take to get good statistical averages. Okay, so I think that was it. There was the notebook has. So we talked about chaotic system, but what is a non-chaotic system then? That does not show this phenomena. And okay, so that's the illustration below. If you take where is it? Somewhere down. A set of equations like this. So I didn't just want to use harmonic oscillator, or what is it called? Simple harmonic oscillator. This is slightly more complicated, but essentially asymptotically a simple harmonic oscillator. So the equations are written over there, differential equations, and the solutions for all initial conditions eventually approach a circle. That's a property of this system. So the attractor in this case is this circle, essentially like a simple harmonic oscillator. And then the same thing if you repeat the same thing, this is what happens. Well, actually in this case, I started with a difference of 10 to minus 8, it remains order 10 to minus 8, and that never changes, because the solutions, if you plot, they are simply phase shifted versions of each other. Do I have that plot somewhere? I don't know if I have, sorry. Yeah, so it's just phase shifted, the distance really doesn't change, and so on and so forth. So that's what happens for non-chaotic systems. Okay, I guess, yeah. Depends on whether your system is controlled or non-controlled. For controlled systems, not necessarily true. There are good ways to control chaotic systems as well, and fairly robust control, in fact, as well. And okay, so the main distinction is that, no, not main, one of the main distinctions, one of the main important properties of chaotic systems is that they are unstable. It turns out that, in fact, unstable fixed points are easier to control than stable fixed points. But that's this is what we were talking about lunch the other day, that these fighter plane jets, they operate at the point of instability, actually, because they're easier to control. But that's a longer. So for control systems, there's a whole different story. What I have been talking about are systems without control. I guess we are trying to control the climate system. We are actually really just perturbing it right now. We are not really controlling it, and perturbing it terribly badly. But apart from that, okay. So let's see. I think that was my stopping point. Let me just confirm. Yeah, okay. Something about observational data. So I'm not going to talk about observational data sets too much because this information gets outdated very quickly. This was from, I think, a couple of years ago, and I think by now it's already outdated. So the number of observations is extremely large. The number of satellites is growing very, very fast. Now with private companies sending satellites, the information is only exploding. So who knows what these numbers are not really to be taken. This review article over here is from 2020, so about 5 years ago, which is quite old. So anyway, so there are a large number of observations available, but they themselves are not sufficient. So I'll skip this part. Also, simulation data sets are growing again, something like hundreds of terabytes of data sets coming out every year and so on. So, okay. I will start here next time, next half. But for now, I'll just leave it at this point, and then after the break, I will, there's a question, yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
So you said that like weather also has this 1 over lambda, so weather is also a chaotic system. Here, these are single variable models, right?
This one was a 3-variable model.
Okay, okay.
There were 3 differential equations that
Right.
that
X, Y,
govern
and
this
Z.
system. Yeah.
So whether it will, I assume, have like far more variables to predict. So in terms of the chaos theory there, like, is it even possible to model decently with the computational, like you are like actually doing this, right? Like how reliable, for example, if I have a weather app on my phone and it actually tells me that it's going to rain in like 5 hours, like, is it even reliable or, yeah?
There is no generic answer. There are parts of the prediction which are extremely reliable nowadays. Part of it is here in this article. For example, up to something like 1 to 2 to 3 day forecasts, except in the case of hurricane, in the extratropics, so US, Europe, and so on and so forth, are very, very highly reliable nowadays. Not so much in the tropics yet, because of lots of issues. Okay, so tropics are a problem because of a whole different variety of reasons. Part of it is because of the lack of data, but that's not the only reason. There are other reasons as well. So there is no general answer to that question. Reliability is present in many contexts for sure. Weather forecasts in US and Europe are pretty spot on for at least 1 or 2 or 3 days. And when there are extreme events, hurricanes, okay, so then things become much, much harder. But yeah, in tropics, weather forecasts are not so accurate. And long-term, the medium range forecasts are even less accurate. So not very reliable.